Okay, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from, and welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time to be here today. We know how full the days can get in EH&S and operations, so it means a lot that you're spending part of your day with us. Today's session is about something that many of you are likely working through right now, which is how to move from a set of separate, disconnected systems toward one unified approach across safety and environmental management. And this isn't going to be a theoretical session. We're going to be spending most of our time hearing directly from a real organization that has lived this journey. Before we dive in, I just want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. If your audio or slides freeze at any point, press F5 on Windows or Command R on a Mac to refresh, or click the question mark icon in the bottom toolbar. Please drop any questions that you have into the Q&A box on the left as they come up, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session today. You'll also find a short feedback survey in the toolbar. Please take a moment to fill it out before you go. And then finally, there are resources linked below the slides. And if you'd also like to talk with a Cority expert about any of our EHS solutions, just submit a demo request using the widget on the bottom left. Okay, so here's how we'll spend our time together today. I'm going to start with a short setup that will cover the challenge of fragmented EHS systems and what changes once that data becomes connected. Then we'll move into the heart of our session, which is a real consolidation journey with MillerKnoll. And what matters most there isn't that it's just about the outcomes. It's going to be about how those decisions were actually made, what worked and what didn't. And then we'll close with your questions. All right. So before we get right into the content, I'm just going to quickly introduce who you'll be hearing from today. My name is Farzhana Shah, and I am a product advisory manager for our safety and risk solutions here at Cority. I came to Cority after a 25-year career in EH&S in the oil and gas industry, where I started out as an environmental engineer. I'll be guiding the first part of today's session, setting the stage on why this topic matters, and then I'll be back at the end to close us out and take your questions. Leading our customer interview is my colleague, Bill Palmer, a fellow product advisory manager at Cority. He'll say a bit more about his own background as the conversation gets underway. And most importantly, our guest of honor, Lauren Miller, as she's the Vice President of EHS at MillerKnoll and has lived this consolidation journey firsthand. Bill will have Lauren share more about her role and her story as they get started. Okay, so with introductions out of the way, let me set the stage for why this conversation is so important. Okay, I'm going to start with how most organizations are set up today. And to be clear, this holds true even in the very best run EHS programs. So you've got your safety teams handling the incidents and investigations, and your environmental teams looking after compliance, chemical data, and monitoring. Each team has strong processes and genuinely capable people. Nothing here is broken. Where the trouble shows up, though, is in the spaces between those systems. The same data is getting entered more than once, information is getting handed off by hand, and then over time, you end up with conflicting versions of the same data. And in a lot of cases, especially in the larger global organizations, those processes aren't even fully digital yet. So the risk itself is forming across both the safety and environmental domains, but the data that represents it is staying fragmented. So I'm just going to make that a bit more concrete with a very simple example. So picture a minor environmental or chemical issue, like a small spill. It gets reported, it'll get investigated, and then it'll get resolved. Everything looks fine. But then the same kind of issue will turn up again somewhere else. And then it shows up again. Each event on its own doesn't raise an alarm, but together they start to tell a different story. So the problem is there's usually no single system connecting those events in a way that makes the pattern visible. No one's doing anything wrong. Every one of those processes are working. They're just not designed to see the whole picture. So let's flip that picture. When safety and environmental data are connected, the people and processes don't fundamentally change, but what changes is the context. So instead of stitching information together after the fact, it starts out connected. An environmental or chemical event often triggers a safety workflow, and that data is shared across teams in real time. So instead of managing separate data sets, you're working from one shared foundation. And that leads to some very practical outcomes: earlier intervention, better decisions, and broader visibility. So instead of reacting to isolated events, you start to see patterns as they form. So what's pushing organizations to move in this direction? So we tend to see a few common triggers. First, environmental and chemical complexity is continuing to grow. There's more data, more requirements, and a lot more scrutiny. Secondly, many organizations, especially post-merger, end up with multiple legacy systems. Sometimes it's a mix of digital tools and paper-based processes. And that creates inconsistent data, duplicate effort, and real difficulty reporting across the enterprise. At some point, the effort it takes to maintain that fragmented state becomes greater than the effort to consolidate it. And that's when organizations start moving toward a single platform. And this isn't just our opinion. A 2025 Verdantix Global Corporate Survey found that most organizations are running 6 or more EHS systems globally. That's concrete evidence of how fragmented the typical environment has become. And this is where connected data stops being a nice to have and becomes the baseline expectation. There's more data flowing in than ever from monitoring systems, your audits and inspections, or your compliance activity. At the same time, regulators and leadership are asking broader and harder questions. It's no longer just about asking what happened. It's now about asking whether we could have seen this coming, or were there signals that we missed. And just to be clear, this isn't about doing more work for EHS teams. It's actually about seeing what's already there earlier and just much more clearly. And that's exactly what disconnected systems struggle to give you. And again, this isn't just our view. The Verdantix Green Quadrant EHS software from 2025 and Gartner's Market Guide for EHS software both name platform consolidation as where this market is heading. Okay, so that's the concept. And now what matters and what we're going to turn to next is what this actually looks like in practice in real life. And while every organization's journey is going to be different, the starting point is almost always the same, which is where you've got multiple systems, inconsistent data, and growing complexity. So now what you're about to hear is a real consolidation journey, moving from multiple systems to a single platform. And importantly, not just about the outcomes, but how the decisions were made, how the data and scope were defined, and then what was learned along the way. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Bill and MillerKnoll's Lauren Miller. Bill and Lauren, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Farzhana. And thank you, Lauren, so much for joining us today. I had this date circled on my calendar because I know, the great work that Lauren, you're doing and MillerKnoll is doing. And I was excited to be able to be a part of sharing your story with a bunch of EHS professionals that are probably dealing with the same thing. From my experience, I know I was. So thank you very much for joining us today. So with that, Lauren, can you tell us about MillerKnoll and your role leading EHS across that enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Bill. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lauren Miller, Vice President of Global Environment, Health, and Safety at MillerKnoll. And if you aren't familiar with MillerKnoll, you've almost certainly experienced some of our products. The famous Aeron chair, our Eames collection, Saarinen, Mies van der Rohe, George Nelson. It's likely you've seen it in a James Bond movie or in a modern art museum somewhere. But MillerKnoll is a collection of more than 30 designs that create furnishings and spaces where people work, heal, learn, and live. So we're just about everywhere, from homes to businesses globally. What I'm humbled, to do every day is provide help with environment, health, and safety programs with our manufacturing facilities, distribution centers, our retail locations and offices around the world. Behind all of those iconic brands, we've got a huge global manufacturing and distribution network. And my entire team's job is to make sure that thousands of associates who build those products go home safely every day. So that's a little bit about us.
Great, thank you. And you came into this fresh off of a major merger. So you had Herman Miller and then you had Knoll and they came together. So what did your EHS technology landscape look like at that point?
Yeah, in 2021, Herman Miller and Knoll came together. And so we had a very large global safety program. And we had three different ways of doing things. We had two legacy software solutions, safety management solutions. We had a third sort of pen and paper part of the business. They weren't using a digital solution at all. So really, we were talking about three different ways of collecting safety data and a lot of ones and zero spreadsheets that we were using to collate all of that data.
Yeah, and I think we all can sympathize with that because I think we have, different software solutions. We have different tools that we use. Operations has their thing. Maintenance may have their thing. So it's really hard to kind of bring a lot of that insight together. So I think we all deal with that at some point. So what made you really realize the status quo just wasn't sustainable for you and that you needed a single enterprise solution rather than maintaining all of those separate systems?
Yeah, as an EHS professional, I think you're asked for a lot of data to present to your regulatory stakeholders, to your customers, to your leadership teams. And really what we walked into post-merger was disconnected systems and a real lost opportunity to share our learning. Near misses at some of our sites, were going under the radar, weren't being reported at all. And the goal, it wasn't better dashboards or anything. It was preventing injuries through shared learning. Being able to look at all of our data, our past data, and yes, it's lagging data, but being able to help inform our strategy as an enterprise, I'd say was really where we were handicapped a bit. So we wanted our customers to feel confident in the safety performance they were asking for from a data standpoint. But then also we publish a better world report, for our customers, our potential clients, and being able to pull all that data from a reliable source together was an issue we were dealing with. And frankly, I myself was not delivering the quality of data to my customers that they deserved. So that's what we experienced firsthand.
Yeah, and I think any of us that kind of worked in the EHS world for a while have been in that situation where you're kind of looking at all this different data from all these different places, right? And you have all these Excel sheets opened up and you're going, where's that information? How do I find it? Is that information even in here? And how do I put this all together and make some kind of cohesive plan that makes sense and moves the ball forward? So yeah, I think we can all deal with that or understand that a little bit. So before we talk about how you made the case internally, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit for a moment. So EHS is ultimately about people going home safely. That's kind of our edict as EHS professionals. We want to make sure that people are safe and they go home exactly the way that they came in, if not better off, right? So when you had those three disconnected systems and gaps in visibility, what was the real world cost of that? And then not just operationally, but what was the human consequence you were trying to prevent?
As a leader, I think that's probably what kept me up at night the most. There were several versions of the truth in a lot of instances with these multiple systems. And that can be, very problematic when we're trying to make sure we're reporting out, about what action plans we needed to make from a corrective action standpoint. And when you have disconnected, systems, we had a lot of silos working to solve their own problems, but we didn't have a really good way to resource all the corrective actions that we needed to that would have the impact we were looking for because we didn't have the data to support those decisions. And I think the real world impact is that every incident, every near miss, and every unsafe condition, it contains a lesson, right? So we were missing out on the opportunity to protect someone else in the world that maybe could have benefited from the learning of that near miss or that minor incident. And to be frank, we did see a couple examples of that. Sewing plants around the world experiencing an incident. They put a corrective action in place, but that wasn't carried over to a different, sewing facility or a similar industry. And we saw multiple examples of that early on. And we're not perfect today, but we certainly have the tool now to see a lot more broadly these incidents occurring and put these corrective actions in place to share those lessons learned. But again, it wasn't about just building one reporting system. It was building a global learning system in a way. Every incident, before we put an enterprise solution in place, we lost a lot of chances to help each facility learn and spread that sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, in my past a little bit, you kind of put in that corrective action, and the more you make it visible, the more others can kind of act upon it and then keep other folks safe. And we also added a continual improvement piece to that too, right? So like if we put in a corrective action, we'd revisit that probably in 6 months or so down the line and make sure that it was appropriate. Is it doing what it was intended? Do we need to pivot and change it? So that's something that folks could also do is not just put in the corrective action and sit it and leave it, just use that, evaluate it further on, and then keep building upon it and make it a little bit better. And that's really what it's all about, right? So finding and using those tools, and in this case, software, to really help achieve that most important goal of protecting our employees and protecting our visitors and the communities in which we operate. So that's kind of our edict as EHS professionals. So how did you sell the business on moving to an enterprise solution? How did MillerKnoll's broader digital transformation journey in manufacturing really help make that case?
Yeah, that's, maybe the advantage post-merger for a lot of locations was we already had enterprise solutions for each of the different businesses. It wasn't starting from scratch. We kind of said, we've got a digital solution, so we had some folks pretty familiar with those tools already, but already MillerKnoll was investing in digital transformation across manufacturing. Smart manufacturing is what we call it. And now it's about connecting people, processes, and technology to help operations make timely decisions. These are things like machine uptime, efficiency, live opinion matters like suggestions. So MillerKnoll was no stranger to having a lot of digital tools in manufacturing, which definitely gave us a leg up. But post-merger, we saw the need to bring together production, quality, HR, and safety systems. So I'd say that set the stage for being able to do this. But helping to understand that each one of those data points is a person, right? When we're talking about a safety management solution, these are people, there are families affected. If someone's going home injured, we were able to tell a very compelling story that, we're not just reporting about machine efficiency. We have an actual associate that's affected, and this data matters. This could mean continuity in care. This could mean preventing the next incident. And very fortunate for us at MillerKnoll, our leadership is extremely supportive of the safety journey. And, again, the compassion behind what we do in EHS definitely helped unlock some of that capability for us.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely agree with that, safety is got to be top to bottom, left to right of the org chart, and everybody's got some role to play in there, and having executive backing is a big piece of that too, right? So so now let's kind of move into the RFP journey and kind of the decision making part of your decisions here. So walk us through how you approach the RFP, and with so many vendors out there, how did you decide which companies to even engage with?
Yeah, and here's again where I think we were set up for success is we have an outstanding procurement team that works with our manufacturing and supply chain. They helped guide us through a structured RFP process. This team also helped leverage industry resources like the Verdantix Green Quadrant. I know was mentioned a bit earlier about how Cority fits in there, and they provide some really wonderful survey data from their customer base. So that was really our kind of like guiding light. Is, all right, let's start with what is recognized in the industry as the best, and try to understand a software for EHS. There were so many examples of safety being embedded in someone else's solution for quality or someone else's solution for HR only, right? And there's a little safety module tagged to, the HR payroll system, or maybe there's a small safety section tied to a work order system, not to name names, but I often found EHS solutions were bolted on as an add-on, and I was really looking for a company who had EHS professionals on staff, but then also were, recognized on that Verdantix Green Quadrant. So that's sort of how I knew where to look. And also we went out to our neighbors, right, in the industry. We went and benchmarked with other companies who had similar manufacturing capabilities. Global presence was important for us because we wanted to make sure our enterprise solution had lingual capabilities to be able to have localized translations. That was very important to us. We wanted to make sure that outside of global scalability, that it was highly configurable. We wanted to be able to be the authors of what people saw on their screen and what the user experience was. I'd say that was also a very big component for us, was having that user experience and able to run custom reports and also integrate with our existing technology. So it had to talk to our HR platform to feed the people data. We also wanted it to be able to speak to our smart manufacturing ecosystem, which fed location data. And lucky for us, we were able to check the box on a lot of these areas. And again, we had just come through a major merger. We needed to create the standard going forward for the global enterprise. But again, with the configurability, I think it gave us the flexibility we needed to make those adjustments by region as needed. Cority did stand out to us in this area. It aligned with our longer term vision in each of those spaces. It ticked all the boxes we needed for compatibility, configurability, the user experience. And again, when we benchmarked with other local manufacturers, the name was popping up as well. But we did go to bid and looked across a number of vendors.
Great. Yeah. And, looking at kind of the data and metrics piece, because in EHS, especially, in your role, I'm sure that you see that we're half data scientists and the other half EHS professionals too, right? So, one of the hardest parts of any EHS project is deciding what data and metrics actually matter to you and your organization. So across a whole enterprise with different pockets wanting data sliced and diced in different ways, how do you decide, or how did you decide what to collect?
Yeah, that was probably the very most important and most difficult conversation to have while workshopping. Well, we started to build our first incident report and started to build the incident investigation. I think as professionals, we want to know everything. We want to know every little detail, the where, what, when, why, how, and then tag onto that to be, okay, what are you doing about it? Who's going to get flagged? And I mean, it was endless possibilities of configuration. But we learned very early, if you are not careful, you end up building a system that reports everything, but doesn't help you make any better decisions, right? And if you leave it too wide open, you can start to, create a poor user experience and incompleteness in your reporting. And so that, that was some early kind of learning we got, and our implementation team was good enough to caution us to say, hey, some best practices here, keep it simple, and what is important to you. So I know many organizations out there, they focus on lagging indicators. We didn't want to focus on just regulatory reporting. We didn't want to just focus on the recordables, the lost times, near misses. We wanted to make sure we were tying in some of our leading indicators. We've been shifting a lot in, I think, our EHS profession over the years to start to look at what those are. Are they suggestions? Are they digital inspections? Risk assessments is a key piece of our strategy at MillerKnoll. But we wanted to make sure we ingrained some of those leading metrics into these incident reports and event reports to make sure that we could help, tell a little bit of that engagement story as well. So I guess the long story short, we looked at our current scorecard and we said, how do we tie in these leading indicators like risk? And that was kind of how we guided the conversation. What are our customers asking for? What's on our operations scorecard? And then a little bit of like true north, what does it need to be in the future?
Great. Yeah. And so post-merger, a lot of those enterprise standards really don't exist yet. And, you describe it as consolidating EHS technology across, newly merged enterprises, really no small thing. So when you're in the middle of it, it can feel like a lot of moving parts. So was there a moment or maybe a conversation, a demo, or a small win that you had where something really clicked and you thought, this is actually going to work? Did you have any of those moments?
Yeah, we had several. Workshopping was a lot of dedicated time and a lot of, moments where we had to sit together as a staff and say, where are we today? We did look historically, to say where were we and what our legacy systems were doing. But I really saw throughout the project, the team that we brought together, the surveying we did with our customers. And when I say customer, I mean our operations teams, our EHS site specialist teams, and our HR and technology partners. When we brought everybody together, we saw, people wanting to be authors of what's next and being able to let go of legacy systems. So I had this aha moment that, I really think people at MillerKnoll are extraordinary and were able to see and understand that they could be authors of that new system. I guess a point like early in the workshops that we had, we had simple questions we debate actively at that table. What is a near miss? Who owns the investigation? And we had to say to ourselves, okay, this is the time we need to define that globally, because again, 2 legacy systems and then pen and paper, there was no standard that existed as an enterprise. There were loose rules around how urgently to report, when you should get a report in the hierarchy of escalation. But we had to really define, what MillerKnoll was going to be and set those standards during the workshop. There were some elements of that had to happen. And I think you saw people stop saying this is how Herman Miller did it. This is how Knoll did it. And again, the aha moment for me was hearing people say, all right, what's going to be best for MillerKnoll? What do we want to be? And that was the moment I knew we were designing our future global EHS program.
Yeah, that's a great process. I love that. It's kind of asking that question hey, what do we want to be when we grow up, right? It's that same here's current state, where do we want to move to future state, and then how do we get there, and let's set that roadmap. That's a great conversation. So now let's move into the consolidation aspect of this and how you went from your safety solution into more adding the chemical solution with it as well. So your safety solution went live in May of 2025. And why was incident and safety management the right starting point for your consolidation journey? And then what did that first success prove internally that made the next step easier to justify?
Yeah, looking back, incident management, it was never going to be the destination, but it was pretty foundational. When I think about what our customers need from us in terms of data, regulators, and our performance disclosures, a lot of that is based with our performance, our safety performance of our, our incident data and then our risk data. So when we looked and went to bid, we said we had to have these basic elements. And one thing that the safety management platform from Cority could deliver was all of those kind of foundational elements that, like I said, a foundations rooted in incidents, near misses. We, built our engagement, framework in there as well to turn on eventually. But, again, safety management just seemed like this is how we do business. And that felt very like block number one for us. We started with it too, because, every location, every leader, and every associate has this fundamental knowledge about reported incident right when it happens. So we wanted to leverage that cultural strength that we had. People very comfortable reporting. There's a lot of openness in our organization to put preventative actions in place and corrective actions. We are ISO certified, so there's a lot of driving factors for why we wanted to have the safety management system in first. But then, of course, we wanted to see what else was out there in terms of our organization and what comes next. So we actually, when we went to bid, we wanted to see the full capability of what all these vendors could offer and how it could grow over time. And there were a lot of EHS, I'd say, built systems, as I went to before, like its purpose was built for EHS. In chemical management, industrial hygiene, environment, sustainability cloud, health service cloud, there was a ton of runway for MillerKnoll in that space. And so that's how we knew we could grow, beyond incident management too. So we knew we had a path forward. And so that's kind of why we started with safety, but we also had an eye to what's 3, 4, 5 years or modules from now going to look like.
That's a great plan. It's a great plan. So so that was the safety, and that went live in May of 2025. So chemical management was your next step, and that went live this past May. So what drove the decision to expand there next? And you'd had both Miller and Knoll on another system and pen and paper SDS binders everywhere, right? That you shared with us ahead of time. And how did moving onto one platform change that? And you mentioned the indexing potential was what made Cority an easy decision for you. So can you kind of unpack all of that, and if you can?
Yeah, here's one for maybe some of our environmental professionals in the crowd. And I know we have extremely passionate and talented environmental staff. On my team, I'm fortunate to work alongside that were huge advocates for this. And the reason was, as you outlined, we had multiple systems, but they still housed safety data sheets, right? They did what they were supposed to do from a very minimalistic standpoint. But what we were looking for was more. How do we get to the place we needed to be to do better, to help with what we needed in terms of chemical indexing, industrial hygiene, environmental reporting, even risk assessments need a certain extra level of data from chemical components that we weren't getting from our previous systems. And so what stood out to us was chemical indexing functionality. Because if anyone on the call knows anything about, I'll tell you, 20 years ago or so, being an intern in EHS, what do you think your first job was, right? Did you have to go through the SDS binder and pull out the old revision and put the new one in and highlight the date? Like, I'm so glad we're here today in terms of digital tools and being able to like use chemical indexing to pull out the ingredients, to give us the capability to have a chemical inventory that's live, to at the click of a button, just tell me how much X chemical I have and how much I need to report to, the EPA or, REACH or the TRI reports or SARA reports or you name it, we've got a report on it. So again, the team we work alongside was really passionate about getting a system in place that would have the data we needed and make it a lot more efficient. So we found in this case, Cority to have a really great indexing capability that would help us streamline that. So instead of literally people on my team sitting hours entering indexing data, we can focus on, things that really matter, like employee engagement and prevention of risk. Looking at change management, looking at new chemicals they want to bring into the business or into materials, looking at safer alternatives because we have those indexed. It allowed us to shift from a lot of administrative behind the scenes, I'd say kind of lagging work, to look forward thinking and risk-based thinking to more value-added work. So I'd say that's kind of, how we got here. And again, my passion is not as rooted in compliance. I mean, that's what we're here to do. And that's, I think, a big benefit we bring businesses in terms of filing our reports and knowing how to be prepared for a regulator. But what, I think that checks all those boxes and more, having one standardized system. We have a lot more confidence in reporting now. And again, we just made a lot of things much more efficient from an administrative standpoint.
Yeah, and it's so important to have that, right, SDS management piece locked in, because you mentioned the environmental side of the house, right, and all the reporting that you have to do for those chemicals. But also, like, if you think on the safety side, most of us know here in the U.S., OSHA always puts out their top 10 most cited regulations every year, right? And OSHA HAZCOM, which this kind of falls under, or definitely falls under, is always in the top 5, right? It's usually like most recently it's been like number 2, and it's only second behind fall protection. So SDS management, chemical management is hugely regulated, not just on the environmental, but on the safety side too. So doing these things well, in the system that actually, helps you speed up that process, so you're not having interns sit there and switch out binders and things like that all the time, and make sure that the employees that need that SDS information have it instantaneously as fast as they can to help with spills and exposures and things like that. So it's very, very important. It sounds like you have a really good system there in place. So a lot of buyers hear the words out of the box all the time, and they assume that's the easy path. You found it more complicated until you got into workshopping. So can you unpack that a little bit for our audience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think out of box can be a little misleading, like based on the company, the vendor's offering or what that truly means. I think in the, whether you think it's a turnkey solution, you could just turn it on and go. Our experience was not that, right? It was that the platform still gives you that level of configurability you're looking for, and it's built around industry best practices for the most part. So to me, I kind of frame it like out of the box means that now to us. We learned that lesson, and you have important decisions you have to make during workshopping. You still will workshop with out of the box solutions with Cority, and that's really how you make it come to life as your company's product. We had the opportunity during chemical management to evaluate like workflows, terminology, notifications. It's not this long drawn out customization. again, I think the recipe here is built on industry best practice. So a lot of that foundational stuff exists within these like out of box or essential solutions. Then we took advantage of that, and the benefit, of course, is going live, implementing timeline just drastically shrinks, and you can, if you've got a workforce that's ready. So we had probably 2/3 of our operations footprint already had a digital solution and could be ready a lot faster. And it's utilized more by the EHS professionals and staff than I'd say like the general population. They would know how to access it and go to it, but the behind the scenes regulatory reportings, inspections, dashboards, that's really with a more technical team. So I think there was a quicker uptime in this instance as well with the out-of-box solution, because again, people are used to a certain level of experience in this space with digital SDSs. So we were able to benefit from that as well.
Right. And you touched on the verbiage and terminology challenges that you might have had, even between your team in Michigan and then your counterparts in the UK. So how did regional and cultural differences help shape how you tailored the solution to fit your needs?
Yeah, we figured out pretty quickly too that implementing a global solution isn't a technology challenge as much as it's a people challenge, and that's a good thing. For the example you just mentioned, our US colleagues and our UK colleagues, we reported, everyone speaks English and reports out in English, but terms like near miss or incident or recordable and reportable is a big one. That differs, regionally and even state to state a little bit, right? So we had to really standardize how investigations were carried out. We had to do our definitions and our several different SOPs and procedures to help add that clarity. But I guess in terms of that, the way we tailored, I guess my unique approach, the way we tailored the solution was I used an idea I got from the Culture Map, and it's a book that's really insightful, and it gives you some clues about different parts of the world and how different people work different ways. And really, you can't shortcut the time to understand how people work the way they do before asking them to change. You have to spend time, and I know that I've got some very talented team members who stay up extra hours of the night to connect with the global teams that are in the different time zones. They want to listen and want to hear, what are you looking for in this solution? So that's where the tailoring came in, is what needs do you need for your region? How does this tool, help you? What's getting in the way? What are obstacles? And so we were able to do a lot of tailoring through the digital inspection processes, inventory for site-specific needs. Regulatory reporting is another example of, what kind of reports do you need to see to fill out your regional, version of OSHA logs, Ritter logs in the UK, or make a report to the WSIB in Canada. So we had to do a lot of exploring and listen to our customers and spend a lot of hours just taking in what the needs were. But again, the configurability of Cority really helped us achieve some of that tailoring by region.
Great. And it's, as we mentioned earlier, it's early days on chemical, right? So you just added that in May of this year. So set hard numbers aside, what value do you expect to get from having safety and chemical data all in one system? And then what early signs are you watching for to know that it's working?
Yeah, I mean, we are really early still. So, in terms of what we expect to gain, I can speak to that a little bit. The value is I don't have to log, initial value is I don't have to log into two different things. My Italian counterparts, can see what we're using at our North Carolina plant who makes similar or the same upholstered furniture. Now there's instant value there and having visibility and alignment on maybe going to a vendor and asking and speccing for the right materials that they need to do the job. So you don't have chemicals in silos anymore. You kind of have this wide open view. What we're also looking forward to, but I'm going to knock out wood right now, is during an incident, you should be able to now see if a chemical was involved. You can run queries on, your chemical incidents, what type of chemicals may have spilled. So I would be really excited to start to query and see chemical specific information. And then, like I said about growth before, how does this impact our industrial hygiene program, environmental compliance, regulatory reporting, all things I expect to have, some more data on in a year from now. But the connectivity of all these modules is what we're looking forward to seeing come to life.
And then kind of stepping away from the metrics part, so we'll set that aside for a second. What really changed for the people on your team? So the ones doing the daily work, now that they're operating in one system instead of three?
So again, early days, but I think the biggest change is simplicity. We had a lot of spreadsheets. We had a lot of, and those spreadsheets are living in a whole bunch of places, SharePoint sites, team sites, network drives. So the simplicity in having one house that's got all of this information is less clicks, increased visibility, and query options. Come next reporting cycle on inventories, right? We're hoping to see some gains in terms of simplicity there. So, I think today it's kind of, we're in the learning phase right now. But already I'll tell you, I went and visited our Toronto, Canada facility 2 weeks ago, and they've already got Cority SDS on their main employee digital board. So a person can click right in and kind of have that digital experience. So they're very quick to implement these digital tools and make that available for associates. So I already see evidence that it's working. It's simple to use. It's got easy user experience. So I think there's little nuggets of success we're seeing while it's getting implemented right now.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear, especially early on in those things. And the ease and willingness to implement is hugely beneficial to have that backing. So that's a good wind in your sail, right? That moving forward. So now let's move into some lessons learned and some reflections kind of on this whole process. So looking back, what are some things that you would do differently? You mentioned some early mistakes like asking vendors for different things and having to scale requests back as you realized, international was starting from pen and paper. So what are those things that you learned from this whole process?
Yeah, I've got about 3 lessons learned that I think would be helpful for my fellow EHS professionals. And I think one, and I can't take credit, like we got this from our consultants early on, is just don't over customize, right? It's tempting to try to recreate every, whether it's legacy process or get all the data that you can possibly get. But that's not where the value is. We found the greatest success is, looking at all these decisions about customizing. Is it truly adding value, or are we just recreating what we've already done? So when you think about the true north statement of like, what do you want to be? Your decisions to customize or collect data should be informed of, where you want to be and how will you use that data. Are you collecting it just to collect it? Or are you going to use that checkbox? Are you going to use that drop-down menu? Otherwise, why are you asking for it, right? So that was kind of lesson 1, and I go back to that even today, right? When we have, improvement ideas or very localized, like, hey, in Michigan at this one site, this leader wants to know this one thing. Can we add it to the global incident report, right? It's like we have to go back to, will we use that data everywhere? What value will that add? So I think that's one huge nugget if you're going through an implementation of building something. And then, second was governance. I think if we were to go about this again, I think we would need to spend more time setting up that global business process, before getting into workshopping and saying, oh, do we all know what near miss means for, our colleagues in India, our colleagues in, Brazil, our colleagues in North Carolina? Like, do we all think we know what near miss means as a collective? So I think governance, that's just a little example, but do we all have the same terminology, ownership, workflows, and just super dive into that before you start implementation. It will make your life so much easier and smoother. And then, three, I guess, lesson learned is, when we did our Cority implementation, we had a little turnover on the Cority side. And so I think just like anything else with a project, continuity matters. I think it would have been more helpful to have, paused and spent a little bit more time during implementation to have, these important configurations, have a little bit more soak time in terms of like why we made the decisions we made, and why we had the discussions we had. Like all of that workshopping discussions and debate were so rich in like why we made decisions that I think we would have benefited from a little bit more context there with the Cority team. Yeah.
Great. And then what advice would you give someone on knowing what to ask for before they go out to bid and go through this process themselves?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, really define your governance and your standards first. Make sure that's well understood across the enterprise. Terminology, workflows, ownership. And I'd say, don't write an RFP or a bid around your current pain points today. There might be a solution out there that solves for those, and then you're going to ask yourself what's next. So kind of understand what your true north is in terms of where your safety program needs to be. What are your customers asking for? Are you collecting this data for a regulator and it's going to check these boxes, but maybe your customer wants to know more. Maybe your customer is focused on something different. So understanding your stakeholders and why you're, trying to get to a different solution and what you're building, be very strategic and be future thinking about it. So, again, what you're trying to achieve, not just what you're trying to replace if you have a legacy system. And the connectivity is a big deal, right? We're living in a digital age where we've got a lot of pockets of technology and everyone's got their different tools. How can your, different tools connect to each other to, again, inform your organization strategically? Because you want to be a partner to your other functions like HR. You want to be a partner to operations, to procurement, to finance, and you have to be thinking a lot bigger than EHS when you go for a solution, and making sure you're not just going to become another siloed tool. So how can you help connect into those other parts of the work? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And you're on a multi-year digital transformation journey, right? And then you're kind of in the beginning stages of that, if you will. So where do you see this taking MillerKnoll's EHS program over the coming years? And then what advice would you give to other organizations, especially those like yourself that had to navigate mergers and acquisitions, who are just starting on that consolidation journey?
Yeah, for MillerKnoll, our vision is to create an EHS program where leaders will spend less time collecting information and more time acting on it, seeing risks sooner, sharing lessons learned in real time, and making like those decisions based on trusted data instead of, I guess, disparate systems. And I guess one of the things I'm most excited about with this is moving further towards that proactive safety. Yes, we'll report the news on incident rates. Yes, we'll report, to regulators if they ask for specific forms and fields and reports. But I think we've spent a lot of time in EHS reporting what happened yesterday, and the real opportunity is being forward thinking and predictive. So if we can start to recognize those patterns, and eliminate hazards before someone gets hurt, that's where our job, has meaning and, drives some of that motivation. So those are kind of what my thoughts are. And I said this very early, but like digital transformation isn't about technology. It's about creating the condition for people to do their jobs safely, but more efficiently. Helps us learn faster, collaborate, and protect people. And that's a lot bigger than just implementing a software. That's informing your culture and helping, meet your strategy your company might have set up. So yeah, it's all very exciting, and I'm just very glad that MillerKnoll is open to this digital transformation, and we can be a part of it.
Okay, I think that does that bring us to the end, Bill? I think we're got our questions.
I think we have a couple of minutes left, maybe for a few questions, if there are any.
Yeah, we're going to open it up now for the audience. Just as a quick reminder, please send your questions through that Q&A box that you see on your screen. We do have a couple of questions that came in. They were answered by Lauren as part of her discussion. So just want to see what else we've got there. How about we go with, here's one. How about we do this one, Lauren, for you. So on the international pen and paper sites, not every site was digital, as you mentioned, and some were still on pen and paper. So how did you bring those sites along without overwhelming them or unintentionally leaving them behind? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I mentioned, some teams had perfected the art of a 3-ring binder. So we had to really show them what was possible. But I think a lot were hungry for a digital solution. This was a chance to almost like give a resource, a corporate resource to our regional sites that were still stuck in the pen and paper era. You mean you're going to give us a tool that's going to let us go digital and have all this functionality? Like, most were very receptive about using the tool, and we're ready to run with it. Absolutely, we're ready to run with it. But to bring them along, we did have to invest in training, have job aids, created. We provided practice demo environments. Then we leaned in heavily on like local champions who we saw as like early implementers and say, hey, show them your best practices and just bring them along on the journey, because they were operating on pen and paper and just kind of using them as a compliance base. We almost showed them a potential to get to the next step of like seeing risk sooner and using it for change management. So a very receptive team in those, situations.
Yeah, no, love that, and it helped. The approach definitely helped their willingness to buy in, right? So that's great to hear. And then we'll just take one last question before we close. And again, back to you, Lauren. I think this is probably a good one to close with. So you went live with safety in May, as you mentioned, of 2025, and then chemical management a year later. Looking back, was starting with safety the right decision and the right call? And then how did you resist that pressure to do everything at once? So, my own experience, like we wanted, we call it the big bang, do everything at once. How did you resist that by just picking safety?
Oh, it was hard. I think every EHS leader has an unlimited wish list and a very limited budget. So, was there pressure to move faster? Absolutely. But that's the best part about finding a vendor who is scalable, that you can see that there is a runway to keep adding to your management system. But again, we kind of rooted safety management in the very essentials of what our customers was asking us for. And then the rest was how many stakeholders do we have as we add on, to these different modules. And we're going to continue to prioritize a global impact versus more regional or nuanced solutions. But that's kind of how we made the decision we did. Not going to lie, budget was part of it, but also does the solution have the most maximum impact for the global enterprise was another way to look at that from a priority standpoint.
Okay, love it. Okay, with that, we're at time. I just wanted to thank Lauren. Really appreciate your time and for really genuinely sharing MillerKnoll's journey and your honest and open reflections and the lessons that you shared with us today. So really, really thank you and appreciate everything that you've shared with us, Lauren, and of course to Bill for guiding us through that conversation. Thanks everyone for spending your time with us. We're going to call it there. And again, just a reminder, resources are also available to you. And anytime you want to reach out to Cority, please feel free to do so with that demo request at the bottom of your screen as well. And again, thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.